After 15 years together, I discovered that my husband was cheating on me with a pregnant woman. But what I did next was even more shocking and changed our lives forever. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. If you're watching for the first time, I'm Laura, and here I share real stories about relationships, because I believe that sometimes the most painful experiences are also the most transformative. Before I start the story that will leave you speechless, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I love knowing where our viewers are. Now, prepare your heart because the story will show how sometimes the worst betrayals can become the best liberations of our lives. You'll see how a devastating discovery gave me the courage I needed to finally fight for my dreams, even if it meant making decisions I never imagined I was capable of making. This is a story of how I learned that sometimes to gain everything, you need to have the courage to lose everything first. And it all started on an ordinary Thursday when I came home early from work. You know how it is when you look at your marriage and realize it's become more of a business partnership than a romance? Well, that was my reality after 15 years with Daniel. 10 years dating, 5 married, and there I was, trying to understand when passion had turned into partnership. Don't get me wrong, we were quite a team when it came to solving problems, paying bills, making important decisions. But you know that feeling of coming home and your heart racing just from seeing the person? That sensation had become history. Daniel had always been a focused guy, determined. One of those people who when they set a goal in their head, doesn't stop until they achieve it. And look, that attracted me a lot in the beginning, you know? But over time, that same quality that enchanted me began to suffocate me. It was work in the morning, work in the afternoon, work at night. Always with that talk of I'm doing this for us, Laura, to guarantee our future. But what future was that if we barely looked at each other properly in the present? I swear I tried to understand his logic. Daniel, we need to talk more. Go out together. I don't know. Watch a movie cuddled on the couch. And he always with the same response, of course, honey. But let me just finish this project here, close this deal, resolve this pending issue. It was always one thing after another. You know that feeling of asking for attention from your own husband? Well, that was exactly what I felt. Like I was an intruder in his life, competing with spreadsheets and meetings for the attention of the man I chose to share my life with. And the worst part is that he didn't mean any harm. I knew that. In his mind, working like a convict was a way to demonstrate love, to take care of me. But damn, sometimes we just want a tight hug and silly conversation, you know? The discussions about this became routine in our house. Me complaining about the lack of attention, him defending himself with the same arguments as always. Laura, you don't understand the pressure I have at work. I'm building something bigger for both of us. And then came that speech about responsibilities, about how he was sacrificing himself for our financial well-being. Part of me even understood, because bills really don't pay themselves and life is getting more expensive. But another part, the part that still believed in romantic love, was frustrated. It was like I had married a robot programmed to work and solve practical problems. Where was the man who used to send me silly messages during work hours? Where was that guy who showed up at my house with a flower just because? Those little gestures had completely disappeared from our routine. But look, I can't deny that we were an efficient duo. When things got tough, when we needed to solve some problem, we functioned like a well-oiled machine. I remember when my mother got sick and had to be hospitalized urgently. Daniel dropped everything, canceled important meetings, stayed by my side the whole time at the hospital. He organized all the health insurance paperwork, talked to the doctors, took care of every detail so I could focus just on being present for my mother. In those moments, I remembered why I fell in love with him. He was a reliable man, solid. One of those people you can lean all the weight of the world on without fear. And that's not a small thing, people. How many of my friends complain about husbands who disappear at the first difficulty? Daniel was never like that. In pain, in joy, in financial crises, he was always there, firm as a rock. So you ask me, Laura, if you were such good partners, what was the problem? The problem was exactly that. We were life partners, not lovers. We were journey companions, not a passionate couple. You know when you watch those romantic movies and think, wow, what an exaggeration, that doesn't exist in real life? Well, I had started believing that too. That mature love was exactly that, companionship, mutual respect, common goals. That butterflies in the stomach were for teenagers. That lukewarm sex once in a while was normal for a 15-year couple. But deep down, really deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. I saw couples our age who still looked at each other with that sparkle in their eyes, who still flirted with each other, who still had complicity beyond bills to pay. And I wondered, was it too late to rescue that? Routine had become our golden prison. Wake up, work, have dinner, watching television, sleep. Weekend. Daniel took advantage to catch up on pending tasks or think about some side project to increase income. I stayed home organizing things, cleaning, preparing food for the week. Sometimes we'd schedule a movie dinner out, but they were more social obligations and moments of genuine pleasure. It's been a while since we went out, I'd say. That's true. Let's schedule something, he'd respond. And there we go, fulfilling the protocol of a couple that needs to maintain the relationship, but without that spontaneous desire to be together. Everything was so mechanical, so predictable. I could predict exactly what he was going to say, how he'd react to each situation. And I'm sure it was the same with me. We were two actors playing the roles of husband and wife, but forgetting to be people in love. What bothered me most was the feeling of invisibility. You know when you're talking to someone, and you realize the person is physically there, but mentally somewhere else? That's how I felt with Daniel. He heard my words, but didn't really listen to me. He responded automatically with ready-made answers. How was your day, honey? Busy, but okay. And yours? And he'd start talking about work, about annoying clients, about problems he needed to solve. When I tried to tell him about my routine, about things I thought about during the day, about dreams I still carried in my heart, he'd give those MMHMMS of someone who's paying attention, but is actually planning the next task on the list. It was frustrating to feel like a stranger in my own home. Like I was just another item on my husband's agenda. And the worst part is that I was sure he didn't even notice this. For him, our relationship was working perfectly. Bills up to date, check. House organized, check. Sporadic but existing sex life, check. Successful marriage, check. And it was in this scenario of efficient partnership, but dormant love, that a different restlessness began to grow in me. A desire that I didn't quite know how to name, but that had to do with creating something new, with giving a greater purpose to our union. Maybe it was maternal instinct speaking louder, or maybe it was just the desire to bring some new life to our predictable routine. But one thing I knew, something needed to change. We couldn't continue living like two roommates who split bills and occasionally had sex. I wanted more. I deserved more. And it was time to find out if Daniel also wanted it, or if our story had reached its end before I even realized it. It was like we were walking in opposite directions on the same road, and at some point we have to decide. Either we changed course, or we accepted that our paths would separate forever. It was one of those Sunday nights, the kind where you already know Monday is coming and laziness hits hard, that the subject came up for the first time in a more serious way. We were watching some random movie on Netflix. I don't even remember what it was, because my attention was completely focused on a scene where a family with a small child appeared. The baby gave one of those delicious little laughs that melts any heart, and I, without thinking much, blurted out, "Daniel, have you ever imagined what it would be like to have a child of our own?" The question came out so naturally that I didn't even notice the weight it carried. He paused the movie immediately, looked at me with that face of someone who had just heard something completely out of context. "Laura, where did that come from now?" he asked with a tone that already revealed certain discomfort. And there began a conversation that would forever change the dynamics of our relationship. I didn't know yet, but I was planting the first seed of a crisis that would grow silently between us. His reaction was faster than I expected. "Honey, you know we're not ready for that yet." Always a yet, as if it were a matter of timing. As if we were talking about buying a new car or taking a special trip. "We need to first get better structured financially, finish paying off the apartment, have a more robust emergency fund." It was the Daniel I knew. Practical, rational, always with imaginary spreadsheets in his head. He began to enumerate the costs of having a child as if he were presenting a business project. Diapers, crib, stroller, health insurance, private school, college. "Laura, do you have any idea how much it costs to raise a child today? Not to mention that my work is in a crucial phase, I can't afford to slow down now." Each word of his was like a stab in my chest. It wasn't exactly what I expected to hear, but it wasn't a total surprise either. Daniel had always been like that, cautious, a planner, one of those people who only move when they're absolutely sure. I tried to argue with my heart, not with reason. But Daniel will never be 100% financially prepared. There will always be a new goal, a bigger objective, a next conquest. And it was true. I saw the same patterns repeating for years. First it was paying off the car, then it was the apartment down payment, now it was finishing paying the financing. And then, it would be the house, then the renovation, then the beach house. Always something more to achieve before really living. Besides, I continued, we have stable jobs, a solid relationship. We're not irresponsible teenagers. But I realized that each word of mine was countered to arguments from him. It was like we were speaking different languages. I spoke the language of feelings, of dreams, of life that pulses even without spreadsheets. He responded in the language of security, logic, calculated risk. And honestly, at that moment I still thought I could convince him with patience and persistence. What hurt me most in that conversation was the way he treated my desire. It wasn't a definitive no, but it was a not now that sounded like an empty promise. Laura, I understand your wish. I really understand. But we need to be smart. Take this step at the right time, when we can offer the best for our child. You know that feeling that the person is saying exactly what you want to hear, but in a way that leaves you even more frustrated? That was it. Because deep down I knew that Daniel's right time would never come. There would always be a new excuse, a valid reason to postpone. And meanwhile, my biological clock kept running. My dreams of motherhood were being pushed to an increasingly uncertain future. But when, Daniel? When exactly will we be ready enough in your opinion? The question came out more acidic than I intended. He sighed in that way of his when he felt he was being pressured. I don't know, Laura. 2, 3 years maybe. Let's see how things evolve. That's when I made my first strategic mistake. Instead of insisting on the subject, of showing how important that was to me, I backed down. Oh, okay. You're right. We're not in a hurry, lie. I was in a hurry. I was in a hurry because I was already 37 and knew that with each passing year, chances decreased and risks increased. I was in a hurry because I saw my friends with small children and felt a pang of envy that embarrassed me. I was in a hurry because I wanted to experience this transformation, this completeness that only motherhood could give me. But I said I wasn't in a hurry because I thought that's what he wanted to hear. I thought that by being the understanding wife, the partner who doesn't pressure, I could gradually plant the idea in his head. What a stupid strategy, right? As if the desire to have children was something you convince someone of little by little, like convincing someone to change soap brands. I completely underestimated his resistance and overestimated my own ability to wait indefinitely. In the following days, the subject hung in the air between us like a loaded cloud that may or may not burst into rain. I noticed that he became somewhat wary whenever a child appeared on TV, or when we passed a family on the street, as if he was afraid I'd return to the subject. And I, trying to be the perfect wife, avoided any mention that could sound like pressure. But you know how it is, right? When you try not to think about something, that's exactly what your mind focuses on all the time. I couldn't see a mother pushing a baby stroller anymore without feeling a tightness in my chest. I couldn't enter a department store anymore without passing through the children's section and imagining what it would be like to choose little clothes for my own child. It was like the whole world had become a giant advertisement about motherhood, and there I was, pretending everything was fine, that I could wait, that I wasn't in any hurry. What an absurd lie. Each day that passed, the desire only grew, but I had to swallow everything and smile, so I wouldn't seem like the annoying wife who doesn't respect her husband's deadlines. The worst part was realizing that Daniel really believed the matter was resolved. For him, the conversation had been clarifying. He explained his reasons, I understood and agreed. End of discussion. He returned to his intense work routine with a clear conscience of someone who had made the sensible decision. He continued talking about our future plans, the house, trips we'd take, investments that would yield well, but never included children in that projection. It was as if I had never mentioned the subject, as if that Sunday night conversation had just been a momentary daydream, that he had successfully corrected, and me? Well, I began to realize that I had done everything wrong, that I should have been firmer, clearer about how much that meant to me. But I also began to question myself, was I wrong? Did he have a point about us not being prepared? Was I being selfish for wanting a child at a time when maybe it wasn't ideal? These doubts began to gnaw at my confidence, and I realized I was entering dangerous territory. Because one thing I learned in this whole story, when you give up your dreams to maintain peace in the relationship, you're not saving anything. You're just postponing an explosion that will be much worse later on. But I didn't know that yet. I still thought that true love was about making concessions, about understanding the other, about waiting for the right moment that might never come. And while I convinced myself of these comforting lies, an unrest was growing inside me, a feeling that time was passing, that opportunities were being lost, that I was betraying my own desires in the name of a harmony that maybe wasn't even that harmonious. But I would only discover this later when other pieces of this puzzle began to reveal themselves, and when I realized that some decisions can't be postponed forever. 3 weeks after that conversation about children, Daniel came home with a different smile on his face, one of those smiles of someone who's plotting a surprise and can barely contain their excitement. Laura, I have an idea that's going to get you excited, he said, throwing his briefcase on the couch and hugging me more affectionately than usual. In my innocence, for a second I thought he had changed his mind about children, that he had reflected during these weeks and come to the conclusion that I was right. My heart even accelerated a bit with the possibility. What idea is that? I asked, trying to control the expectation in my voice. What if we adopted a dog? The question came with so much enthusiasm that I almost felt bad for feeling a pang of disappointment. Almost because deep down I knew exactly what was happening there. It was Daniel's version of solving a problem. If the wife wants to take care of something, let's give her something to take care of. Simple, practical, efficient. His strategy was more subtle than I imagined. Just think, honey, we can practice having a responsibility at home. See what it's like to take care of another living being. He was selling the idea as if it were a test drive for parenthood. And then, if we adapt well, in the future it becomes easier to consider taking the next step. Wow! How smart he was. He was giving me exactly what I needed to hear. The promise of a future, where children were a real possibility. And at the same time, he was buying time, postponing the real decision for at least a few years. Because let's face it, having a dog and having a child are two completely different things, right? But there, at that moment, I bit the bait completely. Really? You'd really be up for having a pet? My excitement was genuine because even being a substitution, it was still something to love, to care for, to fill that void that was growing inside me. Of course. I think it'll be good for both of us. You've always wanted one, and I like animals too. Daniel was neutral about pets, but was willing to make this sacrifice to maintain domestic peace. The following Saturday, there we were at the municipal shelter, looking for our new baby. I was euphoric, imagining what it would be like to have a little thing to care for, to give affection to receive unconditional love from. Daniel was more focused on practical aspects. It can't be too big because of the apartment. It needs to be a dog that doesn't bark much because of the neighbors. Preferably one that doesn't shed much hair. You know how I am about cleanliness. It was him being him, turning even pet adoption into a business decision with well-defined criteria. But you know what happened when we got there? All my rational filters disappeared the moment I saw that 3-month-old yellow lab looking at me with those almond eyes. Daniel, look at her. She's perfect. And she really was. Small, fluffy, with a little face that melted any stone heart. But Laura, remember we talked about size. Oh, come on, she'll grow. But not that much. And look how sweet she is. He sighed. But I was already holding the puppy in my lap and she was licking my face as if she'd known me for years. Game over. We left there with Honey. The first months with Honey were of a happiness I hadn't felt in a long time. Finally, I had something to channel all that maternal instinct that was dammed up inside me. I woke up early to feed her, took her for walks, bought little toys, took 1,000 pictures a day. It was like all that energy I wanted to invest in a child had found a temporary outlet, and the most incredible thing, Daniel also got attached. He'd come work from home some days just to be with her, bought special treats, even created an Instagram account just to post photos of our 4-legged daughter. It was funny to see how he, who resisted so much to the idea of having a baby because of responsibility, was completely melted by that little animal. See how smart she is? He'd say, proud, when Honey learned to sit. Yeah. Seems like we have a knack for this caring thing, I respond, always trying to make the connection with children. He'd smile, but change the subject quickly, as if he understood the subtext, but preferred to pretend he didn't understand. For about 6 months, the strategy worked perfectly. I was happier, more fulfilled, less focused on the children issue. Honey filled a space in my life that I didn't even know was empty. I'd come home from work anxious to see her, planned weekends including walks with her. Even our social life changed. We started frequenting parks, pet shops, places where we could take our little girl. It was like we had found a common hobby, something that united us beyond the practical responsibilities of adult life. Daniel became more present, more affectionate, even with me. It was as if taking care of Honey had reactivated a more affectionate part of him that was kind of dormant. Look how we're a beautiful little family, I joke sometimes, and he'd laugh, hug us both. For a while, I really believed that could be enough. That maybe I had exaggerated the importance of having children, that maybe motherhood could be exercised in other ways. Honey was ours, depended on us, loved us unconditionally. It wasn't exactly what I dreamed of, but it was real. It was ours, it was love. But like every substitution, there came a moment when the effect began to wear off. Not that I loved Honey less, on the contrary, she continued being my darling, my faithful little companion. But I began to realize that, no matter how much I tried, a pet wouldn't completely fill that maternal void that pulsed inside me, especially when I saw my friends posting photos of their children on social media. Birthdays, first words, first steps, first day of school. I'd like all the photos, comment on how beautiful they were, but felt a pang of envy that embarrassed me. And then I'd post a photo of Honey with the caption "my 4-legged daughter," and pretend everything was fine. It was like I was participating in a mother's club by proxy, but would never really be accepted as a full member. Daniel, noticing my mood change, sometimes asked, "Is everything okay, honey? You seem kind of sad lately." And I always said everything was great, that it was just work fatigue. Because how do you explain that his plan had worked temporarily, but the effect was wearing off? The last straw was when my sister-in-law got pregnant, Daniel's sister, who had always been kind of disorganized, kind of irresponsible with money, showed up at Sunday lunch announcing she was expecting her first child. The family's reaction was total celebration. My mother-in-law cried with emotion, my father-in-law opened champagne. Everyone talking about how wonderful it would be to have a baby in the family. And there I was, with a forced smile, congratulating and pretending I was happy, while inside my heart was shattered. "Wow, what incredible news. You guys must be over the moon," I said, hugging my sister-in-law, while inside I thought, why can she and I can't? Why can everyone make this decision naturally except me? On the way back home, Daniel commented, "At least now my parents will stop pressuring us, right? They'll already have their little grandchild." And that's when it hit me. For him, his sister's pregnancy was a relief, a way to take the pressure off us. For me, it was more proof that I was being left behind, that I was missing life's timing because of his deadlines. That night, lying in bed with Honey sleeping between us, I looked at Daniel and realized that the dog strategy had worked better than he imagined. Not because it had satisfied me, but because it had given me a taste of what I was missing. Taking care of Honey showed me that I did have maternal vocation, that I enjoyed nurturing, protecting, loving unconditionally. But it also showed me that this was just the appetizer of something much bigger, that I really wanted to experience. And there, listening to his breathing beside me and feeling the warmth of our little dog, I began to understand that maybe it was time to stop accepting substitutes. Maybe it was time to fight for what I really wanted, even if it meant disturbing the peace of our home, because true love sometimes requires courage, and I was beginning to gather mine. But I still didn't know that events much bigger than my maternal desires were about to shake our apparently organized little world. If you're watching the video up to here, comment courage in the comments. Family pressure is one of those things that starts subtle and grows like a snowball, until you realize you're being crushed by expectations that aren't even yours. With my parents, the pressure was always more delicate, more between the lines. My mother, especially after my brother had little Theo, started with those apparently innocent comments that everyone knows. "Oh, Laura, did you see how Theo has grown? He's so cute. Don't you feel like having one just like him?" Or then, "Daughter, you know that the younger a woman gets pregnant, the better, right? Lower risk of complications." She never said directly, "I want grandchildren," but it was there implicit in every conversation, in every look when she saw a child, in every sigh when the family subject came up. My father was even more subtle. Sometimes he'd comment about the importance of perpetuating the surname, or talk about how gratifying it was to see children building their own families. It was that gentle, but constant pressure that eats away at you inside because you know you're disappointing people you love. And the worst part is they didn't even know about my conflict with Daniel. For them, we were a stable couple, married for years, at the right age with reasonable financial conditions. In their minds, it was just a matter of time. But the pressure from Daniel's parents was on a completely different level. Regina and Anthony were fervent evangelicals, the kind who take the Bible very seriously and believe that marriage without children is almost a sin. Every time we visited them, which happened religiously every Sunday after service, the subject came up one way or another. "Daniel, my son, when are you going to give us the joy of being grandparents?" Regina would say this with that yellow smile of someone who's pressuring in disguise. "Mom, we're waiting for the right moment." Daniel always responded with the same memorized phrase. And then she'd continue, "But son, it's written in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. God wants you to have children, it's His will for your lives." People, imagine the pressure. It wasn't just a personal or social issue, it was almost a divine obligation. Anthony would still add, "Laura, daughter, a woman only fully realizes herself when she becomes a mother, it's feminine nature." I'd smile and agree, but inside I was boiling. What do you mean a woman only realizes herself being a mother? And if I couldn't have children, would I be an incomplete woman forever? What bothered me most was the difference in treatment. My sister-in-law, who got pregnant without planning her words, became the family darling overnight. Every conversation revolved around her pregnancy, morning sickness, the baby's gender, the layout. Regina called her every day to see how she was doing, if she needed anything, if she was taking her vitamins properly. With me? Oh, with me it was just that pitying look, as if I were a poor thing who hadn't yet discovered life's true happiness. "Laura, you need to talk to Priscilla. She can give you some tips on how to get pregnant faster. People, for God's sake. As if the problem was me not knowing how to make babies. Each Sunday that passed, I left there more anguished, more pressured, more questioning if I was making the right choices in my life. And Daniel? He was visibly uncomfortable with his parents' pressure, but never confronted them directly. Never said, "Look, Dad and Mom, this is our business, you need to respect our time." No. He preferred to give vague excuses and let all the pressure fall on me. The situation got even worse when baby shower invitations, baptisms, first birthday parties started arriving. It seemed like everyone around us was entering this reproduction phase, and we were the only couple that was late in this race at events. Conversations always ended up revolving around motherhood, natural birth versus cesarean, breastfeeding, sleepless nights, child development. I tried to participate, but it was obvious I was the odd one out, the one who hadn't gone through any of these experiences. "Laura, when it's your turn, you'll see how wonderful it is," friends would say, always assuming that my turn was a certainty, just a matter of timing. And there I was, smiling and agreeing, pretending everything was fine, that it was just a matter of time. But inside, each comment was a stab. Because I didn't know if my turn would really come someday, or if I was missing the boat because of my own husband's resistance. It was a constant anguish, a feeling of being left behind in something fundamental in life. But the episode that marked me most happened at a Mother's Day lunch at my in-laws' house. Regina had prepared a beautiful table, full of flowers, to celebrate all the mothers in the family. My sister-in-law was there, already showing her belly, being pampered by everyone. There were her church friends, all with small children, exchanging experiences about motherhood. And there was me, feeling completely out of place, as if I didn't belong in that environment. At dessert time, Regina stood up to make an emotional speech about how women were blessed by God with the gift of generating life. "Being a mother is the most important mission a woman can have on earth," she said, looking directly at me. "And I'm sure that soon all the women at this table will be experiencing this blessing." Everyone applauded, everyone smiled, and there I was, forcing a smile while feeling like running away. Because you know what the worst part was? I agreed with her. I really wanted to experience this blessing, but my own husband was preventing me, and I couldn't say that there, at that moment, in front of everyone. The ride back home that day was tense. Daniel drove in silence, clearly uncomfortable with the pressure his parents had put on. "My mother sometimes really exaggerates," he said, as if that was sufficient apology. "Daniel, do you realize that everyone is expecting us to have children? Your family, my family, our friends." I tried to put the subject on the table once more. "I know, honey, but we can't make important decisions just because of external pressure. It has to be our choice in our time." Always the same speech about our time, as if there really was a joint decision being made. Because in reality, only his time mattered, only his opinion was being considered. "But Daniel, when will it be our time? Can you give me at least an approximate prediction?" The question came out more desperate than I wanted. He sighed deeply, in that way of someone who's being unfairly pressured. "Laura, it doesn't work like that. I can't give you a date marked on the calendar. When I feel we're really ready, we'll talk again." And there went another opportunity to definitively resolve the matter. That night, I kept thinking about how family pressure was affecting me more than I'd like to admit. On one hand, it deeply irritated me that other people had opinions about my reproductive life. On the other hand, this external pressure was validating a desire I felt, but that was constantly being invalidated by my own husband. It was like the family was on my side in a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. Regina, with all her excessive religiosity, was speaking a truth that echoed in my heart. I really wanted to be a mother. My parents, with all their delicacy, were signaling that it was natural and expected for me to want to build a complete family. Everyone around me confirmed that my desire was legitimate, normal, expected. Everyone except the only person whose opinion really mattered, my husband. And this was creating an internal tension that I no longer knew how to deal with. It was like I was living a double life, the understanding wife who accepted waiting indefinitely, and the woman who was being consumed by an increasingly urgent desire to experience motherhood. Family pressure was also changing the dynamics of our social gatherings. Every event became an opportunity for someone to ask about our plans to have children. Every innocent comment about children turned into indirect pressure. Every baby that appeared in front of us became a reminder of what was missing in our life. It was exhausting having to keep giving explanations to everyone, making up excuses, pretending everything was fine. And the worst part is I realized people were starting to speculate. Do you think they have some problem getting pregnant? Do you think Daniel doesn't want children? Do you think Laura has some health issue? The whispers and pitying looks were becoming increasingly obvious. And there I was, protecting a husband who didn't even realize how the situation was hurting me, or if he realized, he preferred to pretend he didn't see. Because admitting he saw would mean having to take action, make a choice, leave his comfort zone. And that, apparently, was out of the question. It was in a routine consultation with my gynecologist that the bomb exploded in my head. Dr. Johnson, a woman always very direct, told me something that completely changed my perspective on time and choices. Laura, your IUD is reaching the end of its validity. We need to schedule the replacement for next month. A simple, technical sentence, but one that echoed in my mind like thunder. Because suddenly I realized that for 5 years I had been artificially blocking my fertility, postponing a decision that maybe couldn't be postponed forever. Doctor, what if I don't want to replace it? What if I want to try to get pregnant? The question came out of my mouth before I could fully process what I was saying. She looked at me with that expression of someone who's had thousands of similar conversations with women my age. Laura, you're 37 years old. If you really want to have children, you need to think seriously about it now. Female fertility begins to decline significantly after 35, and there was the naked truth I'd been avoiding facing. Time was passing, and it wasn't going to wait for me. The consultation continued, but my mind was completely focused on that revelation. 5 years. For 5 years I had used that small copper device, making the unconscious decision not to get pregnant. At the time I got it, it made perfect sense. We were newlyweds, we wanted to adjust to married life, establish our careers. But now I was realizing I had put my fertility on autopilot, delegating one of the most important decisions of my life to an object. Doctor, if I remove the IUD now, how long would it take for me to get pregnant? I asked, trying to sound casual, as if it were just scientific curiosity. It depends on many factors, Laura. Some women get pregnant in the first cycle after removal, others might take a few months. At your age, I'd recommend you try for no more than 6 months before seeking specialized help. 6 months. That information kept hammering in my head. If I removed the IUD today, and we started trying, with luck I could be pregnant before my 38th birthday. But what if it took longer? What if we had to do treatments? What if it was too late? The way back home was an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, I was excited about the real possibility of finally taking concrete action toward motherhood. On the other, I was terrified by the responsibility of having to make this decision alone. Since Daniel clearly wasn't prepared to discuss the matter maturely, I arrived home determined to talk seriously with him about the IUD deadline, to explain the urgency of the situation, to make him understand that it was no longer possible to postpone indefinitely. I found him in the living room, working on his laptop, probably solving some work issue. Daniel, I need to talk to you about something important. He didn't even look up from the screen. Go ahead, honey, I'm listening. Lie. He was dividing his attention between me and whatever he was doing there. Today I went to the gynecologist and she said my IUD is expiring. I need to decide whether I'm going to replace it or remove it. Now he stopped what he was doing and looked at me. Oh, I see. Well, scheduled to replace it then, right? At least we don't have to worry about this for the next 5 years. His response was so automatic, so without reflection, that I felt a rage I had never felt before. Daniel, you didn't understand. I said I need to decide whether I'm going to replace it. It's not an automatic decision. He frowned as if I were speaking Chinese. What do you mean decide? Of course you're going to replace it. We already talked about this, we're not ready to have children yet. Always a yet. Always a vague promise of a future that might never come. Daniel, I'm 37 years old. If I replace it IUD now, when I remove it I'll be 42. Do you realize how this drastically reduces our chances of having a healthy child? I was trying to explain with data, with logic in the language he understood, but he remained inflexible. Laura, it doesn't work like that. There are women who get pregnant in their early 40s without any problem. You're exaggerating. As if it were that simple, as if it were just a matter of optimism. Am I exaggerating, Daniel? The doctor clearly said that after 35, female fertility declines significantly. This isn't exaggeration. These are medical facts. My voice was rising, something that rarely happened between us. That's when he said the phrase that hurt me more deeply than any argument we'd ever had. Laura, stop this paranoia. If it's meant to be, it will be. And if it's not meant to be, we'll live very well just the two of us. What do you mean if it's meant to be? As if having children was a matter of luck, of destiny, and not an active choice a couple makes? And worse, if it's not meant to be, we'll live very well just the two of us. That meant that for him it didn't matter. That having children, or not, was irrelevant to his happiness. While for me it was becoming the most important issue of my life. Daniel, are you telling me that it doesn't matter if we have children or not? I asked, needing to be absolutely sure of what I was hearing. It's not that it doesn't matter, Laura, but I can't pretend I'm dying to have a child when that's not true. I accept the idea if it happens naturally, but it's not something that keeps me up at night or makes me happy just thinking about it. At least he was being honest. Brutally honest. And that honesty hurt more than any lie could hurt. That night, lying in bed, I began to process not only the practical issue of the IUD, but the entire emotional dimension behind it. For 5 years, I had delegated my fertility to a medical device. But now I was realizing I had delegated one of the most important decisions of my life to a man who clearly didn't share my dreams. And worse, time was passing, and it wasn't going to wait for me to gather courage to face this reality. I kept imagining what it would be like 10 years from now, if I were one of those women who regret not trying to have children when it was still possible. I imagined myself at 47, looking back and thinking, if I had had the courage to remove the iron at that moment, maybe my life would be completely different. That image scared me more than any argument with Daniel, because one thing I was learning, it's better to regret something you did than something you didn't have the courage to do. And the biological clock doesn't stop for anyone, not even for understanding wives who respect their husband's timing too much. The next day, I called the clinic and rescheduled the appointment, not to replace the IUD, not to remove it immediately, but to buy time to think. Doctor, can I postpone this decision for a few more weeks? I asked, still hoping that maybe Daniel would change his mind, that maybe a deeper conversation would resolve our impasses. Laura, you can, but don't let too much time pass. And while you're here, I'm going to order some tests to evaluate your ovarian reserve. It's important to know exactly what our situation is before making any decision. Ovarian reserve, another technical term that sounded like a sentence, as if my ability to be a mother was something finite, something that could end without warning. I left the clinic with a pile of test orders and a growing certainty that I couldn't postpone this decision indefinitely. Either I took control of my reproductive life, or I ran the risk of waking up one day without options. And that possibility was becoming more frightening than any marital conflict. Because you know what I was discovering? That there are fears that are bigger than the fear of bothering your partner. The fear of not realizing a fundamental dream. The fear of becoming a woman embittered by what-ifs. The fear of aging with the feeling that you miss life's timing. These fears were growing inside me faster than my ability to control them. And for the first time in 15 years of relationship, I was seriously considering the possibility of making an important decision. Without Daniel's total consensus, not because I didn't love him, but because I was beginning to love myself enough not to give up my deepest dreams. The question was, would I have enough courage to act according to this new awareness? Or would I continue being the wife who puts marital harmony above her own personal fulfillment? I didn't have that answer yet. But one thing was becoming clear. Time to decide was running out, and some choices can't be postponed forever. 2 weeks after the consultation with Dr. Johnson, I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. The IUD issue had stirred something deep inside me. An urgency the first could no longer ignore or sweep under the rug. It was a Thursday night. Daniel had come home earlier than usual, miracle. And I was determined to have the most honest and direct conversation of our married life. No more beating around the bush. No more when the time is right. No more excuses. I prepared a special dinner, opened a bottle of wine, created the most conducive atmosphere possible for a serious conversation. Daniel, we need to talk about children. Really, without running away from the subject. He sighed and put his fork on the plate, like someone preparing for another boring discussion about the same topic. Laura, we've already talked about this several times. No, Daniel. We've never really talked. You always give excuses. I always accept, and the subject hangs in the air. Today I want clear answers. My voice was firm, determined. It was now or never. The first question I asked was straight to the point. Daniel, do you want to have children someday? Or are you just tolerating the idea because you know I want to? The silence that followed was deafening. He sat there, playing with his food, clearly uncomfortable with the frankness of the question. It's complicated, Laura. It's not complicated, Daniel. It's simple. Yes or no? Do you want to be a father? I insisted because I was tired of evasive answers. It's not that I don't want. It's that I don't feel this need that you feel. For me, our life is good as it is. There was a truth I had been suspecting for years, but that he had never had the courage to admit openly. So you're telling me that if it depended only on you, we would never have children? Laura, don't put it like that. How should I put it, Daniel? You just told me our life is good as it is, that you don't feel the need to have children. How else can I interpret this? My voice was rising, and I felt that years of repressed frustration were coming to the surface. That's when he dropped the bomb I wasn't expecting. Laura, you want to know the truth? I've always been clear about this since we were dating. Remember when you talked about marriage and I said I didn't want to get married without being professionally established? Remember when I said I didn't see the point in having children young? That I wanted to enjoy life first? He was right, and that hurt me even more. Daniel, that was over 10 years ago. People change, evolve, review their priorities. But I haven't changed, Laura, and you knew that when you decided to marry me. The implicit accusation was clear. I was the one who had deluded myself. I was the one who thought I could change him. Daniel, are you telling me I married you knowing you would never want children? It's not that I'll never want. It's that it's not a priority for me. If it happens, it happened. If it doesn't happen, life goes on. That coldness, that indifference towards something that was so important to me, made me furious. How can you be so cold about this? We're talking about starting a family. And then came the question that changed everything. Daniel, answer me something with total honesty. Why did you marry me? He stopped eating, looked at me as if I had asked an absurd question. What do you mean, why did I marry you? Because I love you, obviously. No, Daniel. Tell me the truth. Why did you marry me when you married me? Because from what you're saying, you weren't ready, didn't want to, would have preferred to wait longer. The silence returned to hover between us, but this time I was determined not to let it pass. Laura, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Answer the question. I shouted, and it was the first time in 15 years I had shouted at him. Okay. You want to know. I got married because you were pressuring me. Because we have been together for 10 years, you talked about marriage every day, your family asked when it would be, my family asked when it would be. I got married because everyone expected it of me. His brutal honesty left me speechless. So you married me reluctantly? Not reluctantly. But it wasn't my ideal timing, no. The revelation was like a punch to the stomach. During all these years of marriage, I thought we had made the decision together. At the right time for both of us. Finding out that he had married under pressure, almost against his will, shook all my certainties about our relationship. Daniel, do you realize what you're telling me? That our marriage was a concession you made to please me? It's not like that, Laura. I love you. I wanted to be with you. It just wasn't my perfect timing to get married. And now it's the same thing with children. You're going to wait for what perfect timing? When I'm 45, 50? It was clear he had a pattern, postponing important decisions until being forced by circumstances to make them. Laura, you're distorting everything. Am I distorting? Daniel, you just told me you married me reluctantly, that you don't want children, that our life is good as it is. What else do you want to tell me? That you would have preferred to marry someone else? The discussion was getting out of control, but I couldn't stop anymore. Years of frustration, of postponed dreams, of unmet expectations were pouring out like a dam that burst. Daniel tried to control the situation. Laura, let's stop this discussion. You're exaggerating, interpreting everything in the worst possible way. But I didn't want to stop anymore. I wanted answers. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand once and for all who I was married to. Daniel, answer me just one more question. If you could go back in time, would you make the same choices? Would you marry me at the same time? Live the same life? Again that deafening silence. And silence, in this case, was a more eloquent answer than any words. I understand, I said, getting up from the table. You don't need to answer. Your silence already answered. Laura, where are you going? To think. I need to think about a lot of things. And I left the room, leaving him there with dinner half finished, and an expression of someone who didn't understand why I was making such a big deal about obvious things. Because for him, apparently, it was obvious that marriage could be under pressure, that children were optional, that I should accept any crumb of affection he was willing to give me. That night, locked in the guest room, I finally understood the real dimension of my problem. It wasn't just the children issue. It was the entire dynamic of our relationship. I had always been the one who wanted more commitment, more affection, more joint projects, more life. He had always been the one who held back, who postponed, who conditioned everything to the ideal moment that never came. And I, in my eagerness to be the perfect wife, always accepted this role of being the one who waits, who understands, who settles for crumbs. But finding out that even our marriage had been a concession, he made somewhat reluctantly touch something fundamental in my self-esteem. It made me question whether I had ever really been desired by him, or if I had always been just the convenient option, the safe choice, the logical decision. And if it was like that with marriage, it would certainly be like that with children, something he would accept doing to please me. But without genuine enthusiasm, without real desire to be a father. It was that night that I made a decision that would change everything. Not about removing or not removing the IUD. That was still open. But about stopping begging for affection and life projects from someone who clearly didn't share my dreams. If Daniel didn't want to have children, if he had married me under pressure, if our current life was the maximum he was willing to offer, then maybe it was time for me to rethink what I wanted for me. Because one thing I had learned in that brutal conversation, you can't build a happy family with someone who's there out of obligation, convenience, social pressure. Children deserve to be wanted by both parents, not to be another concession a reluctant husband makes to maintain domestic peace. And me? Well, I deserve more than being a wife who has to beg to be loved, who has to convince her own husband to want to build a life with me. I deserve someone who would dream with me, not someone who tolerated my dreams. This awareness was being born, and with it, a courage I didn't know I possessed. After that explosive discussion, our house became an emotional minefield. Daniel made a point of acting as if nothing had happened, as if that conversation had been just a misunderstanding that would soon be forgotten. But for me, it was impossible to pretend normalcy after discovering that my marriage had been, in part, the result of social pressure and not genuine desire. We returned to that mechanical routine as always, except now I saw every gesture, every word, every silence with painful clarity. We would wake up, he would rush to work without even giving me a proper kiss. I would get ready automatically and head to my job. At night, he would come home exhausted, we would eat watching TV, and each would go to their individual activities, him to the computer, me to some random series. It was like we were two roommates who shared expenses and occasionally had sex for convenience. But now this reality suffocated me in a way it had never suffocated me before. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a room I thought was well lit, and suddenly I saw all the dust, all the lack of life, all the emptiness that existed there. Daniel's work, which had always been intense, seemed to have become an even bigger obsession after our fight. It was as if he was using the job as an excuse to avoid any deeper conversation with me. He would leave the house at 7 in the morning, come back at 9 at night, and on weekends he always had some side project, some extra consulting, some important meeting he couldn't miss. Daniel, we don't see each other anymore. I would complain sometimes. Laura, you know I'm in a crucial phase of my career. I'm building our future. Always the same response. Always our future that justified sacrificing our present. But I was beginning to question what future that was he talked so much about. A future where we would be old, tired, without energy to enjoy all that money he was chasing. A future where I would look back and realize I had wasted the best years of my life waiting for him to stop working. His obsession with work had become a barrier between us, a wall that grew one brick at a time, with each extra meeting, each sacrificed weekend at the altar of professional ambition. And the worst part is he saw no problem with this. For him, he was being the exemplary husband, the responsible provider, the man focused on giving security to the family. But what family? We were just two adults sharing bills and responsibilities, living parallel lives in the same house. I tried to create moments of connection, suggest programs together, propose trips, but I always ran into his busy schedule or the excuse that we needed to save for some financial goal. Daniel, how about we travel on the long weekend? It's been a while since we went out together. Laura, did you see the price of tickets? And I have a project I need to deliver the Monday after. Always a practical reason. Always a responsibility more important than enjoying life as a couple. I began to realize that he had transformed our relationship into a company. Everything was planned, calculated, optimized for maximum financial efficiency. Romance, spontaneity, adventures? These were luxuries that didn't fit in the business plan of our married life. And I, who had always been more of a dreamer, more spontaneous, was feeling like an employee in a company where I could never meet productivity targets. It was frustrating trying to keep a relationship alive with someone who saw love as just another item on the monthly expense spreadsheet. What bothered me most was realizing how stagnant I was in my own life. While Daniel was chasing projects, networking, updating courses, I was stuck in the same job for years, doing the same functions, earning practically the same salary. And you know why? Because I always prioritized our married life. When an opportunity appeared that required more time or travel, I would refuse so as not to disturb our routine. When the chance came to take a night course that could boost my career, I would let it pass to be available in the few moments he was home. I had put my professional dreams in second place to be the present wife, the companion who was always there when he needed. And what was the result? He didn't even notice my presence, didn't value my sacrifice. I had become invisible in my own life, an extra in the movie starred by my husband. And the worst, when I complained about my professional situation, he would say, "Laura, if you're not happy at your job, change. No one is forcing you to stay where you are." As if it were that simple. As if he didn't know I had limited my options to be available for our relationship. The last straw happened on a Saturday, when I suggested we do a general cleaning of the apartment, and take the opportunity to rearrange the furniture, give a new look to our house. It was a desperate attempt to create some activity we could do together, something that would symbolize a new beginning for us. Daniel, how about today we work on the living room decoration? We can go to a store, choose some new things, spend the day creating a different environment. He was on the computer, as always, working on some spreadsheet or answering emails. Laura, I can't today. I have to finish a proposal that needs to go out early Monday morning. It was Saturday, noon, and he was working. Daniel, it's the weekend. Can't you disconnect a little? You don't understand the pressure I have, Laura. This proposal can guarantee our money for the next 6 months. And there he was again, justifying the present in the name of a hypothetical future. Okay, I said, then I'll do it alone. And that's exactly what I did. I spent the whole day reorganizing our house, moving furniture around, buying plants, creating a more welcoming environment. When he finished working, in the late afternoon, he didn't even comment on the changes. He simply threw himself on the couch and turned on the TV, as if nothing had happened. It was there, seeing my husband completely ignore the effort I had made to improve our home, that something definitively broke inside me. I realized I had been alone in this relationship for a long time. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. I was alone in dreaming about our future, alone in trying to keep romance alive, alone in creating special moments, alone in fighting for our connection. Daniel had settled into a routine where he fulfilled his husband duties, pay bills, maintain sporadic sex, show up at social events, but had given up being my life companion, my accomplice, my adventure partner. He was there physically, but emotionally had checked out of our relationship years ago. And me? I was exhausted from being the only person investing energy in this marriage. Tired of starting conversations alone, of planning programs he didn't want to do, of dreaming about projects he didn't share. It was like trying to dance a waltz alone. No matter how much I tried, the result always sounded strange, incomplete, lonely. That night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I stayed awake thinking about how our life had become a golden prison. We had a beautiful apartment, stable jobs, a comfortable life from a material point of view. But where was the passion? Where were the shared dreams? Where was the complicity that should exist between two people who chose to share their lives? I looked at couples of friends, who still had fun together, who made plans, who supported each other's dreams, and felt an envy that embarrassed me. Why did it seem so natural with them, and with us it had become a Herculean effort? Was this really how it was after 15 years together? Or had we lost something essential along the way? And the question that haunted me most, was there still time to recover what we lost, or had our relationship reached a point of no return? I didn't know the answers, but one thing was becoming clear. I couldn't continue living on autopilot, pretending everything was fine, accepting crumbs of attention and affection. I needed more. I deserved more. And if Daniel couldn't or didn't want to offer that more, maybe it was time to consider alternatives I had never dared think about before. Because you know what I was discovering? That loneliness for two is much worse than real loneliness. At least when you're alone. You know you're alone and can do something about it. But when you're married and feel lonely, there's a mental confusion that paralyzes you. You should be happy because you have company. So why do you feel so empty? You should be grateful because you have stability. So why do you feel so restless? And it was in this state of deep questioning about my own life that other revelations were about to arrive. Revelations that would throw down even the few certainties I still had about my marriage, and would force me to make decisions I never imagined I would be capable of making. The discovery happened in the most banal way possible, as always happens, with life's greatest catastrophes. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was at home with a terrible headache and had left work early. Daniel didn't know I was home because I didn't answer his calls. My phone was on silent, and I was sleeping. When I woke up, it was almost 5 in the afternoon, and I went to the kitchen to take some medicine. That's when I heard the key turning in the lock and prepared to greet my husband, with that automatic smile as always. But what I heard from the hallway froze my blood. "Honey, I'm home. Laura isn't here. She said she was going to work late today." I froze. Daniel was talking to someone, but not to me, and he had called that person honey. My heart raced and a feeling of unreality took over me. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, that maybe the headache was making me hear things. But then I heard a female voice responding, "Great, then we have the house to ourselves." It was real. My husband was bringing another woman to our house, thinking I wasn't there. My first reaction was total shock. I stood there in the kitchen, trembling, unable to fully process what was happening. Part of me wanted to run out and confront them right then, scream, make a scene, demand explanations. But another part, a more calculating part I didn't even know existed, told me to stay quiet and listen. Because one thing is suspecting your husband might be cheating on you, Another completely different thing is having absolute confirmation. And I needed to be sure of what was happening before taking any action. I hid in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, where I could hear everything without being seen. What I heard in the following minutes destroyed any illusion I might still have about my marriage. "I missed you," she said. "Me too. This week was crazy. I could barely get out to see you," he responded. And then the sound of kisses, whispers, complicit giggles. They were lovers long enough to have intimacy, routine, their own codes. It wasn't a one-night affair or a moment of weakness. It was a complete parallel relationship with affection, with care, with everything that was missing in our marriage. What shocked me most wasn't so much the betrayal itself, but the difference in Daniel's tone of voice. With her, he was being affectionate, attentive, present. It was like hearing a completely different man. A man I didn't know or had known a long time ago and forgotten existed. "How was your day?" "Beautiful," he asked her with genuine interest he hadn't shown me in years. And she told him about her work, about colleagues, about small details of the day. And he listened, laughed, commented. It was exactly the kind of conversation I tried to have with him every night. And he always cut short with excuses about being tired or worried about work. But with her, he had time. With her, he had patience. With her, he was present in a way he hadn't been with me for a long time. And that hurt more than any physical betrayal could hurt. Because it meant the problem wasn't him being incapable of being affectionate or attentive. The problem was that he didn't want to be like that with me. That I didn't inspire that kind of interest and affection in him. I managed to crawl silently to the bedroom and lock the door. My mind was in total chaos. 15 years of relationship, 5 years of marriage, and I was discovering that my husband had a complete emotional life with another person. A life he kept hidden from me with impressive skill. How many times had he lied about working late? How many important meetings were actually encounters with her? How many urgent projects were excuses not to be present in our relationship because he was investing energy in the relationship with her? I began to go over the last months, looking for signs I had missed. And they were there, too obvious: the phone always face down, the longer showers when he got home, the even greater decrease in our physical intimacy, the increasingly elaborate excuses to go out on weekends. How was I so blind? How did I not notice that my own husband was leading a double life under my nose? The answer was simple and painful because I was so focused on being the perfect wife, on not bothering, on accepting any crumb of attention, that I stopped paying attention to details. The sound of them moving around the house, laughing, talking, left me panicked. I needed to get out of there without being seen. But how? The only exit was through the front door, exactly where they were. I stayed locked in the bedroom for almost 2 hours, listening to my life crumble through the walls. At some point, they went to the living room, probably to the couch where Daniel and I watched TV every night. The irony was cruel. He was being intimate with another woman in the same place, where he pretended intimacy with me. When I finally heard the front door slam and his car leaving, probably to take her away, I knew I had a few minutes to act. I left the bedroom silently, grabbed my purse, left a note on the kitchen table saying I had gone to visit a friend and would be back later, and left the house. My mind was blank, my heart was shattered. But one thing was crystal clear: I couldn't confront him at that moment. I needed time to process, to think, to decide what my next move would be. I drove aimlessly for hours, crying, screaming alone in the car, trying to understand how my life had reached that point. I had always been a woman who prided herself on being loyal, on believing in marriage, on fighting for the relationship, and discovering that while I was fighting alone for both of us, he was building something new with another person, made me question everything. I questioned my value as a woman, as a wife, as a companion. I wondered what she had that I didn't have, what he found in her that he didn't find in me. Was she younger, more beautiful, more interesting? Didn't she demand children, life projects, future from him? Was it just fun, without responsibilities, without pressure? And the question that tormented me most: how long had this been going on? Months, years? Had our entire marriage been a lie while he had his real life with other people? The level of humiliation I felt was unbearable. Not only did he not love me the way I needed to be loved, but he was still giving another woman exactly what I begged to receive from him. But along with the pain, with the anger, with the humiliation, something different was growing inside me, a cold clarity about my situation. As painful as it was to discover the betrayal, it had given me valuable information. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating when I felt something was wrong in our marriage. I wasn't being dramatic when I complained about the lack of attention and affection. The problem wasn't me having unrealistic expectations. The problem was that my husband was giving another person exactly what I needed to receive from him. And that changed everything. Because it meant I didn't need to keep questioning myself about whether I was too demanding, whether I was asking for too much, whether I should settle for less. It meant I deserved true love, genuine attention, sincere affection. And if he couldn't or didn't want to give me that, but could give it to another person, then the problem wasn't with me. It was with him. Or rather, it was with our relationship, which clearly had died a long time ago. Only no one had had the courage to declare the official death. When I finally returned home, it was already done. Daniel was sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't spent the entire afternoon betraying our matrimonial relationship. I looked at him there, so calm, so at peace with his lies, and felt a mixture of revulsion and pity. Revulsion for the falseness, for the ability to lead a double life with such naturalness. Pity because he had become a man I didn't recognize, who maybe I had never really known. I lay on my side of the bed, farther from him than ever, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for explanations. I was going to observe. I was going to plan. I was going to make strategic decisions about my future. Because one thing that discovery had shown me, if he could have secrets, I could too. If he could make unilateral decisions about our life, I could too. And maybe it was time for me to stop being the wife who accepts everything and start being the woman who fights for her own dreams, even if it meant taking actions Daniel would never expect from me. In the 3 days following the discovery of the betrayal, I transformed into a professional actress. I would wake up, greet Daniel with the same smile as always, ask about his plans for the day, wish him good work. It was an almost perfect performance of the wife I had always been. Except now I knew I was performing for an audience that didn't deserve my authenticity. Daniel, oblivious to everything, continued his normal routine, work. Some extra outings that I now knew where they led, and at home, that same indifference as always. But there was a crucial difference. I was no longer suffering from his indifference. I was observing, analyzing, planning. It was as if discovering the betrayal had broken a spell, freed me from an emotional prison where I kept myself of my own free will. Now I saw our marriage for what it really was, an elaborate farce where I was the only one who still believed in the script. And that clarity, as painful as it was giving me a power I had never experienced before. The power to make decisions without worrying about pleasing someone who clearly didn't worry about pleasing me. The appointment with Dr. Johnson was scheduled for Thursday, and as I drove there, my mind was buzzing with possibilities that a few weeks ago would have been unthinkable. Daniel's betrayal had completely changed the game. If before I felt guilty about considering having a child without his total enthusiasm, now I understood that he had broken our matrimonial contract long before I even considered breaking any rules. He was living his life as he saw fit, making unilateral decisions about where to invest his emotional and physical energy, lying to me every day. Why should I continue being the only person in this relationship who respected agreements and considered the other's feelings? Drive, Johnson, I said as soon as I entered the office. I want to remove the IUD today. She looked at me surprised, because in the previous consultation I was full of doubts. Laura, did you guys talk about this? Did you make the decision together? Her question made me laugh internally. Decision together? My husband hadn't made any important decision with me in years. Yes, we talked, I lied with a naturalness that surprised me. And we decided it's the right time. The procedure was quick, almost anticlimactic for something that represented such a radical turn in my life. In less than 10 minutes, I was free from the device that for 5 years had blocked my fertility. Done, Laura. You can try to get pregnant starting now. Remember, it can happen in the first cycle. So if you're not ready immediately, use another contraceptive method. I nodded, but inside I was thinking, Doctor, if I get pregnant in the first cycle, it'll be exactly what I want. I left the clinic with a feeling of freedom and power I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I had made an important decision about my own life without asking permission, without considering the opinion of someone who clearly didn't consider mine. It was an intoxicating and scary feeling at the same time, because I knew I was crossing a line, taking an action that would change everything forever. But after years of being the wife who accepts, who waits, who settles, maybe it was time for me to be the woman who acts. The following days were of a silent tension that only I could feel. Daniel continued his normal life, dividing himself between official work, extramarital encounters, and the few moments at home where he pretended to be my husband. But I was living at a completely different intensity. Every cycle of my body had become significant, every sign a possibility. I was hyper-conscious of every change, every symptom, every day that passed. It was like I was participating in a secret race where only I knew the rules of the game. And the strangest thing, for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. It wasn't just the possibility of getting pregnant that excited me. It was the sensation of taking control of my own story. I've no longer being just a supporting character in Daniel's life, waiting for him to give me permission to live my own dreams. I was being the protagonist of my own life, making important decisions, taking calculated risks, and that was addictive. What surprised me most was how I managed to maintain the facade of normalcy with Daniel. During dinner, while he told me about the difficult project that was consuming so much of his time, which I now knew was code for meetings with his mistress, I would smile and ask the usual questions. "How's it going, honey? Do you think you'll be able to finish by the end of the month?" And he would elaborate his lies with impressive creativity, creating details about imaginary clients, invented deadlines, fictional difficulties. It was almost admirable how he had become such an efficient liar, but two people could play this game. While he invented stories about work, I omitted small details about my new reality, that I was no longer using contraception, that I was tracking my reproductive cycle with scientific precision, that I was taking folic acid and vitamins to optimize a possible pregnancy. We were two actors, performing a play about a happy marriage, except now I knew we were both acting. The difference was that I was directing my performance toward a specific goal, while he was just maintaining the status quo that suited him. The first time we had sex after I removed the IUD was surreal, not because it was especially romantic or passionate. It continued being that mechanical sex of a couple who had known each other for 15 years, but because for me it had a completely different meaning. While he was there, fulfilling another matrimonial obligation before returning his emotional energy to his mistress, I was participating in a ritual that could change our lives forever, and he had no idea. The irony was delicious and terrible at the same time. The man who refused to have children with me, who always found excuses to postpone this dream, was potentially getting me pregnant without knowing, while betraying our marriage with another woman. It was a poetic justice of which the universe had made me an instrument, and with each intimate encounter, I felt I was balancing the cosmic scale of our relationship. He was betraying me emotionally every day. I was taking back control over my reproductive destiny. It seemed fair, but the decision I had made came with an emotional complexity I hadn't fully anticipated. During the day, when I was alone, sometimes moral doubts about what I was doing would assail me. Was it right to get pregnant without the father's knowledge? Was it right to bring a child into the world in a situation of marital conflict? Was it right to use my fertility as a form of revenge or justice? These questions tormented me. But whenever I started feeling guilty, I remembered the sound of his voice with the other woman. I remembered the affection he could show her and denied me. I remembered years of asking for attention, affection, shared life projects, and always being postponed to a more appropriate moment that never came. And then the guilt would pass, replaced by a cold determination. I wasn't doing anything he wasn't already doing for months, making unilateral decisions. That affected our relationship. The only difference was that my decisions had the potential to create life, while his only created lies. 3 weeks after removing the IUD, my period was late. Just 2 days, but enough to make my heart race. I bought a pregnancy test on the way from work, hiding it in my purse like it was contraband. It was funny how something so simple, so common, had become an object loaded with meaning and secrecy. I got home before Daniel, a rarity I strategically took advantage of, and took the test with trembling hands. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. And then, 2 lines. Positive. Pregnant. After years dreaming of this moment, it had finally arrived, but in a way I had never imagined. There was no champagne, no congratulatory hugs, no shared tears of joy. There was just me, alone in the bathroom, looking at those 2 lines and feeling a mixture of euphoria, terror, and dark satisfaction. I had succeeded. Despite all obstacles, despite Daniel's resistance, despite our relationship being destroyed, I had managed to fulfill my dream of being a mother. Now came the hardest part, telling a man who didn't want children that he was going to be a father, without revealing that I had made this decision alone. I kept the positive pregnancy test in a little box inside my closet, like it was a secret treasure only I could know. For 3 whole days, I carried alone the biggest secret of my adult life. I was pregnant by the man who was cheating on me, who didn't want children, who had married me reluctantly. The irony of the situation was so intense that sometimes I laughed alone. A kind of hysterical laugh of someone who can't believe the twists life can take. During those 3 days, I planned exactly how I would tell the news. I couldn't seem like I knew exactly when I had gotten pregnant, nor show that I was expecting this result. I needed to seem as surprised as he would be. So I invented a story. I had been feeling nauseous for a few days. My period was late. I decided to take a test just to be sure. It was a simple but efficient lie. What I didn't expect was the intensity of my own performance. When the moment came to reveal the discovery, it was as if the years of being a submissive wife had trained me to be an excellent actress. When necessary, I chose a Friday night for the big revelation. Daniel came home earlier than usual. Probably his mistress had other commitments, and seemed to be in a good mood. Perfect. I prepared a special dinner. Opened a bottle of wine just for him, of course. Created a romantic atmosphere. He even commented, "Wow, what's all this fuss about? Did something happen?" It was funny how small gestures of attention from me were already cause for strangeness for him. "Can't I make an effort for my husband anymore?" I replied, trying to sound normal. During dinner, I made sure to touch his wine glass several times, to refuse when he offered, creating a pattern that would be important for the revelation. "Laura, aren't you going to drink? I opened this wine especially for us." "Oh, I'm not really in the mood today. I think I'm feeling a bit nauseous." I planted the first seed. He didn't even care. Continued eating and talking about work, the usual lies about urgent projects and demanding clients. But I was right there, present in my own theater, waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb that would change our lives forever. After dinner, when we were on the couch watching TV, I began the second phase of my performance. "Daniel, can I tell you something strange?" He didn't even take his eyes off the television. "Sure, go ahead. My period is late for almost a week." Now he looked at me, but with that expression of someone who didn't understand the relevance of the information. And isn't that normal sometimes, men? Even after 15 years together, he had no idea how my cycle worked. "Daniel, I'm extremely regular. I never delay more than 2 days." The penny was beginning to drop. I saw the exact moment when the possibility crossed his mind, because his expression changed completely. "Laura, do you think? I don't know. Maybe I should take a test, right? Just to be sure." He was silent for a few seconds, processing. "But how don't you take birth control?" "Daniel, I've had an IUD for 5 years. You know that." "Oh, right. But isn't the IUD like 99% effective?" "Yes, but no method is 100% safe." Technically, I wasn't lying. I was just admitting that I had removed our safety a few weeks ago. His reaction was exactly what I expected. Total panic. "Laura, let's take this test now. I need to know." He got up from the couch as if he were on fire. "Daniel, calm down. It's almost 10 at night. Let's wait until tomorrow." "No. I can't wait. I'm going to the pharmacy to buy a test now." And off he went, running to confirm his worst nightmares. I stayed alone in the living room, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I was finally getting a strong emotional reaction from him, even if it was despair. Sadness because this should be happy news for a couple, a moment of celebration, not panic. But I had accepted that our relationship was far from ideal a long time ago. Now I was just playing with the cards I had in my hand, and apparently they were very good cards. When he came back from the pharmacy, he was pale, sweating like he had run a marathon. I brought 3 different tests to be absolutely sure. It was almost comical to see such a controlled, rational man completely destabilized by a possibility that for me was a dream come true. Comment truth in the comments if you're watching up to here. The theater in the bathroom was worthy of an Oscar. I pretended nervousness, pretended anxiety, pretended I was as surprised as he was with each positive test. "Daniel, it's 3 different tests, all positive. I can't believe it." He was leaning against the bathroom wall, as if he needed physical support not to collapse. "How could this happen?" "The IUD. The IUD should." "Daniel, I don't understand either. Maybe it moved out of place, maybe it failed. These things happen." Each word of mine was carefully calculated to sound like someone trying to understand an unexpected situation. And it worked perfectly. He was so focused on his own shock that he didn't even question details, didn't ask to see the tests more closely, didn't ask the questions a more attentive man might ask. "Laura, what are we going to do?" His question sounded more like existential despair than a consultation about our next step. "I don't know, Daniel. We need to talk, right? Decide together." I purposely used the word together, knowing what irony it carried. Because for the first time in years, I was making important decisions alone, and he had no idea. The conversation that followed was revealing in many ways. "Laura, you need to understand my situation. I wasn't prepared for this. We never planned to have children now." "Daniel, I wasn't expecting it either. But it happened. But what are we going to do? How are we going to manage? Financially, emotionally, practically." It was interesting to see how, faced with a real crisis, he revealed his true priorities. Not a word about happiness, about the possibility of being a father, about the miracle of life. Just practical concerns, just obstacles, just problems. "Daniel, women get pregnant every day. All of humanity was built by people who didn't feel ready to have children. But Laura, you don't understand. My work is in a crucial phase. I can't afford to slow down now. Always work. Always career. Always his priorities first. And what are you suggesting, Daniel? I asked, wanting to hear from him the words I knew were on the tip of his tongue. I think we should consider all options. All options. He couldn't even say the word abortion, but was suggesting I get rid of the child I wanted so much because it didn't fit his schedule. It was at that moment that the mask completely fell for me. I had always known Daniel wasn't enthusiastic about the idea of having children, but I thought that faced with the accomplished fact he would end up accepting, maybe even getting excited. But no. He was genuinely desperate, as if pregnancy were a catastrophe that had befallen his carefully planned life. And that brought me brutal clarity about the type of man I was married to. A man who saw his own pregnant wife as a problem to be solved, not as the mother of his child. A man who, even faced with an established pregnancy, still thought only about how it would affect his life, his career, his plans. Not once did he ask how I was feeling, if I was okay, if I needed anything. It was all about him, always about him. Daniel, I need time to process all this, I said, getting up from the couch. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk more calmly. He didn't even protest. He was probably relieved not to have to pretend support or affection in a situation that clearly terrified him. That night, alone in the guest room, I finally allowed the reality of the situation to hit me completely. I was pregnant. My years-long dream was coming true. Inside me was growing a new life, a baby who would be my child. But at the same time, it was clear I would be a single mother even while married. Because the man sleeping in the next room wasn't a potential father. He was just a reluctant sperm donor who saw our child as an inconvenient obstacle. And to complete the surreal picture of my life, this same man had been betraying our marriage for months, possibly loving another woman, while rejecting the possibility of starting a family with me. It was such an absurd situation that it seemed like a soap opera script, not real life. But it was my life, and now I needed to decide what to do with all this explosive information that only I possessed. Because one thing was clear, Daniel was about to make drastic decisions based on an incomplete version of the story. And maybe it was time for him to know the whole truth. The weekend following the pregnancy revelation was of almost unbearable tension. Daniel could barely look me in the eyes, as if I were a time bomb about to explode and destroy all his carefully elaborated plans. He spent all Saturday on the computer working, but I knew he was just avoiding having to talk about our new reality. Sunday morning, he announced he needed to go out to resolve some urgent matters. Code I now deciphered perfectly. He was going to meet his mistress to tell her about the catastrophe that had befallen his double life. The irony was delicious. Probably at that exact moment he was anguished, telling another woman about how his wife had gotten pregnant by accident, without knowing that I knew exactly who she was and that none of that had been accidental. It was like watching a movie where only I knew the ending. When he came back home Sunday night, he was even more tense, more distant. It was obvious the conversation with his mistress hadn't been comforting. Maybe she also wasn't very enthusiastic about the idea of competing with a pregnant wife. Monday arrived as a temporary relief. At least at work I could pretend normalcy, focus on other things besides the drama of my personal life. But Daniel had scheduled a serious conversation for that night, and I knew it would be the moment when he would formalize his rejection of fatherhood. I arrived home prepared for anything, or at least that's what I thought. He was in the living room with a formal posture, as if he were about to make a business presentation. Laura, we need to talk about our situation. Our situation. As if pregnancy were a logistics problem that needed to be solved efficiently. I'm listening, Daniel. I thought a lot about all this, and came to the conclusion that we're not prepared to have a child now. I think the most sensible thing would be for you to seriously consider the possibility of not continuing this pregnancy. There it was. The abortion suggestion said directly, without beating around the bush. The man who had married me against his will now wanted me to get rid of the child I had dreamed of having for years. Daniel, are you asking me to abort our baby? I'm being practical, Laura. Realistic. We don't have emotional or financial structure for this now. The calm with which he spoke about discarding our child gave me a coldness I didn't know I possessed. It was as if something inside me had finally crystallized into pure determination. And if I say I don't want to abort? I asked, observing his reaction. Then we're going to have serious problems in our relationship. A threat. He was threatening me with the end of our marriage if I insisted on having the child I wanted so much. What kind of problems, Daniel? Laura, if you decide to have this child against my will, I'm going to separate from you. And there was the final ultimatum. Me or the baby. As if they were mutually exclusive, as if it were impossible for him to adapt to the idea of being a father. So you're giving me an ultimatum? Either I abort or you leave me? It's not an ultimatum. It's reality. I'm not prepared to be a father. I don't want to be a father now. And I'm not going to pretend I wanted just to please you. At least he was being honest. Brutally honest. It was almost refreshing after months of lies about other things. I understood your position perfectly, Daniel, I said, with a calm that surprised him. Now let me tell you something that will clarify our conversation even more. That's when I decided to drop the first bomb. Daniel, I know about your affair. The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the color drain from his face, saw the exact moment when his world collapsed. What are you talking about? He tried to deny, but his voice came out shaky without conviction. I'm talking about the woman you bring here to the house when you think I'm not here. I'm talking about your urgent projects that are actually meetings with your mistress. He turned white as paper. Laura, I can explain. You don't need to explain, Daniel. I heard you. I heard how you talk to her, how you're affectionate with her, how you show exactly the kind of attention and affection you deny me for years. Each word of mine was like a stab, and I could see he was entering total panic. When did you find out? A few weeks ago. I came home early, and you didn't see me. It was a partial lie. I hadn't seen them, just heard. But the psychological effect was the same. So you know our situation is even more complicated, he said, trying to regain some control of the conversation. But I wasn't finished. I had saved the second bomb for this exact moment. Daniel, there's one more thing you need to know about our complicated situation. He looked at me with an expression of someone prepared for another devastating revelation. I didn't get pregnant by accident. This time the silence was even deeper. What do you mean? You heard me, Daniel. I removed the IUD 3 weeks before getting pregnant. I planned everything. The confession came out with a tranquility that surprised me. It was liberating to finally tell the truth. You what? He was processing the information as if I had spoken in a foreign language. You heard me, Daniel. I discovered your affair, decided that if you could make unilateral decisions about our relationship, I could too. So I removed the IUD and got pregnant on purpose. The shock on his face was almost comical. It was as if he couldn't process that his submissive wife had been capable of such an elaborate strategy. Laura, you betrayed me. The accusation was so absurd I laughed. I betrayed you? Daniel, you've been leading a double life for months, bringing another woman to our house, lying to me every day, and I'm the one who betrayed you? But I still wasn't finished. I saved the third bomb for the grand finale. Oh, and there's one more thing about your mistress you'll want to know. He was so stunned he just looked at me, waiting. She's pregnant too. The effect was like I had thrown a bucket of cold water on him. That's impossible. How do you know that? Because I saw her leaving Dr. Johnson's office when I went to remove my IUD. She was carrying those prenatal pamphlets they only give to pregnant women. It was a total lie, but perfectly plausible and devastatingly effective. So congratulations, Daniel. You're going to be a father twice in the same year, with 2 different women. Exactly the kind of complication a controlled man like you always avoided. He sat heavily on the couch, as if his legs could no longer support him. This can't be happening, he murmured, more to himself than to me. It can and it is, Daniel. You played with fire for too long, and now you're being burned on all sides. The final part of the revelation was the most satisfying. You know what's the difference between me and her, Daniel? I want to have your child. I've dreamed about it for years. For me, this pregnancy is a fulfillment of my greatest desire. For her, I left the sentence hanging, letting him complete the reasoning himself. For her it must be a nightmare, a complication that will destroy your romance, a responsibility she never wanted. He was in total shock, running his hands through his hair, trying to process how his life had become so complicated in a matter of minutes. Laura, what do you want from me? The question sounded more like a moan of despair. I don't want anything from you, Daniel. I'll never want anything from you again. You made it very clear that you married me reluctantly, that you don't want to have children with me, that you find in another woman what you can't find in me. So I'm going to give you exactly what you always wanted, your freedom. The final irony was there. I was going to give him the separation he had used as a threat, but now it would be my choice, not his. Laura, wait. Let's talk calmly. He tried to regain control, but it was too late. There's nothing more to talk about, Daniel. You're going to have to deal with the consequences of your choices. To pregnancies, to women, to lives completely messed up because of your inability to be honest and assume responsibilities. I got up from the couch, leaving him there, destroyed, trying to understand how the man who always controlled everything had completely lost control of his own life. Oh, and Daniel, I said, turning around one last time before going up to the bedroom. Next time you want to have a double life, Maybe it would be better to choose women who don't frequent the same gynecologist as your wife. It was a lie, but he would never know. And the doubt about how I had discovered everything would torment him forever, just as he had tormented me with his lies for so long. Poetic justice of the finest quality. The 3 days that followed that explosive revelation were the strangest of my adult life. Daniel simply disappeared. He didn't come home Tuesday, or Wednesday, or Thursday. He sent a laconic message saying he was thinking about everything and needed space to process. Space. After 15 years together, he needed space to process that he had destroyed our marriage with lies and betrayals. The irony was that I, for the first time in years, didn't miss his presence. The house was quiet but not empty. It was full of possibilities, of freedom, of a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. Honey and I had our quiet routine. I'd come home from work. She'd greet me excitedly. We'd have dinner together, she with kibble, me with something simple. Watch TV on the couch. It was a simple life but genuine. No lies, no pretense, without the constant tension of trying to please someone who clearly didn't want to be pleased. And in the middle of all this, there was a life growing inside me, my child. Finally, my child. But the nights were complicated when I was alone with my thoughts. Questions began to arise like a flood. Why had Daniel acted that way? What had I done wrong for the man who had once loved me to become a lying stranger? Had he ever really loved me? Or had I always been just a safe choice, the convenient option? And the question that tormented me most, if I hadn't discovered the affair, if I hadn't made the radical decision to get pregnant without warning, would we have continued in that farce forever? Would he continue lying? Would I continue accepting crumbs of affection? And would our life be just an elaborate performance of marital happiness? The idea gave me chills. How many years of my life would I have wasted waiting for him to become the husband I needed, the father I dreamed of for my children? It was terrifying to think that if I hadn't had the courage to investigate my suspicions, to act based on my own desires, I could have spent my entire life in a relationship that only existed in my imagination. What intrigued me most was trying to understand the exact moment when everything had started to go wrong. When had Daniel stopped seeing me as a desirable woman and started seeing me as an obligation? When had he decided it was acceptable to lie to me every day? When had our intimacy become mechanical routine, our shared dreams become conflicts of interest, our complicity transformed into peaceful coexistence? I went over our history like someone analyzing a movie, looking for clues, trying to identify the turning points. Maybe it was when we got married and he realized he no longer needed to make an effort to win me over. Maybe when I started talking seriously about children, and he realized our visions of the future were incompatible. Or maybe, and this was the most painful hypothesis, he had never really loved me the way I needed to be loved, and I had created a romanticized version of our relationship that never really existed. It was like discovering you were living in a movie, but you were the only person who knew the script. The loneliness of those days also brought me a clarity about myself that was both liberating and scary. I discovered I had spent years being an actress in my own life, playing the role of the perfect wife for an audience that didn't value my performance. I had molded my personality, my dreams, my priorities to fit what I thought Daniel expected of me. But who was I when I took off that mask? What were my true desires, my real ambitions, my authentic personality? It was strange to be alone at home and realize I didn't quite know what to do with my freedom. For so long my life had revolved around pleasing Daniel, keeping our relationship working, being the wife he needed, that I had forgotten to be the woman I needed to be. Now, pregnant and alone, I was being forced to rediscover who Laura was outside the context of Daniel's wife. And honestly, I was anxious to meet this woman. I had the feeling she would be much more interesting than I imagined. Thursday night, Daniel finally showed up. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. He was dejected with deep dark circles, that air of someone who hadn't slept properly. "Laura, we need to talk." The phrase I had heard so many times, but now with a completely different weight. "I'm listening," I replied with a calm that surprised me. I messed up everything. I know I messed up everything. It was a start. Messing up is an understatement, Daniel. You built an entire life based on lies. I know. And I know I have no excuse for what I did. At least he wasn't trying to justify himself. Why, Daniel? That's what I can't understand. Why did you prefer to build a relationship with another person instead of trying to fix ours? The question came out more vulnerable than I intended, but I really needed to understand. Because with her it was easier. There were no demands, no expectations, no responsibilities, it was just fun. His honesty was brutal, but necessary, and with me it was work. It wasn't work, Laura, but it was real, and sometimes real is too heavy. That answer gave me a painful understanding about the type of man Daniel really was. He wasn't necessarily bad or ill-intentioned. He was just someone who ran from emotional responsibilities, who preferred fantasy to reality, who chose the easy path even if it meant hurting the people he loved. Daniel, do you realize you destroyed 15 years of my life? 15 years I dedicated to building something with you while you were having fun? Laura, I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. And worse, you would continue hurting forever if I hadn't found out. It was true, and we both knew it. And now, what do you expect to happen? I asked, genuinely curious about what his plan was. I want to try to fix it. I want to go to therapy. I want to be the husband you deserve. Daniel, stop. I interrupted him before he started making promises we knew he couldn't keep. You don't want to be a father. You said that clearly. You threatened to leave me if I didn't abort. How do you intend to be the husband I deserve if you reject the most important thing happening in my life? His silence was more eloquent than any answer could be. He couldn't refute it because it was true. Even sorry about the affair, even wanting to fix our marriage, he still couldn't embrace fatherhood. Laura, about the child. I still think it's not the ideal time. Daniel, there's no ideal time. You'll always find an excuse, always have a reason to postpone. And I'm not going to wait for your approval to live my life anymore. It was liberating to say that, to finally assume that I didn't need his permission to be happy. So you're telling me there's no way back? He asked, and for the first time I saw something like real despair in his eyes. Not the performative despair of the night he discovered my pregnancy, but genuine sadness of someone who was understanding he had lost something important. Daniel, answer me something. If you could go back in time, would you do it differently? Would you marry me at the same time? Would you accept having children when I asked? Would you be faithful? Another silence. And in that silence was my answer. The goodbye wasn't dramatic like I imagined it would be. There were no screams, no tears of anger, no door slamming. It was just a sad conversation between two people who had loved each other once, but had become incompatible in an irreversible way. I'm going to stay in the apartment for a few weeks, until I find a place to live, I said, with a practicality that surprised me. Laura, this is your home. I'm the one who should leave. No, Daniel. This place has too many bad memories now. I want to start over in a place that's truly mine. And it was true. I wanted to raise my child in an environment that was ours, free from the shadows of my failed marriage. And about the child, you made it clear you don't want to be a father. I'm not going to force you to assume a responsibility you don't want. But I'm also not going to deprive you of knowing your child if you ever change your mind. It was the most generous thing I could offer someone who had hurt me so much, Laura. Daniel, there's nothing more to say. We had 15 years to get it right, and we couldn't. Now it's time to go separate ways. That night, after he left again, probably to wherever he had been staying the last few days, I sat on the couch with Honey and finally allowed the magnitude of everything that had happened to hit me. I was ending a 15-year marriage. I was pregnant at 37. I was about to become a single mother. It would be terrifying if it weren't also incredibly liberating. For the first time in years, I didn't know exactly what the future held for me. But I knew it would be my future based on my choices, directed by my dreams. And that was both scary and exciting at the same time. I put my hand on my belly, still with no visible sign of pregnancy, and made a silent promise to my child: you're going to grow up in a house full of true love. Even if it's just my love, you won't witness lies, pretense, or toxic relationships disguised as normalcy. And if someday I find someone who truly loves us, it will be because I chose someone who deserves to be part of our story. It was the end of a chapter, but also the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I was anxious to discover what came next. And that was my story. How a painful betrayal transformed into the greatest liberation of my life. Today, 6 months later, I'm raising my child in a house full of true love. Building a life based on my own choices, not on the crumbs of affection someone was willing to give me. But now I want to know, what would you do in my place? Do you think I exaggerated by getting pregnant without warning? Or did Daniel deserve exactly what he got? And the question that won't go away, are some betrayals actually blessings in disguise that free us from relationships that have already died? Leave your honest opinion here in the comments, because I read all of them and love seeing your different points of view. And take the opportunity to suggest what kind of story you want to see. In the next video, toxic relationships, personal overcoming, or maybe an even more dramatic plot twist. If this story touched you in some way, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Activate notifications so you don't miss any new videos. And share it with those friends who need to hear that they deserve more than they're receiving. And don't forget to write in the comments what city you're watching from. I'm creating a united community here, and I want to get to know each one of you. Until the next video, And remember, sometimes, losing everything is the first step to gaining the life you really deserve.